Hello and welcome to The Right Idea, where we discuss the people, policy, and politics that drive Texas. I'm your host, Brian Phillips. I'm the Chief Communications Officer at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And with me, as always, is my co-host, our Chief of Research, Derek Cohen. All right, Derek. Well, we're almost through. Less than 2 weeks now, and things are moving. Things are moving right along. What's the feeling up at the Capitol on Sunny Day?
Well, the feeling is that there's only about 2 weeks left. So basically, you know how like when they say, "Oh, it's 80 outside, but it feels like 86." You know, there's 2 weeks left, but it feels like a month. Unfortunately, a month if your stuff is dead, and it just feels like a couple days if it's not. But
if your stuff is dead, it's going to start feeling like 2 years.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like, okay.
Every time that bell rings on the floor, you're down checking your watch, and so you'll be checking your watch.
When do I get to see my family now?
But I'll tell you though, it's the session's going well, and things seem to be coming to a satisfactory conclusion for all parties and for all decision-making parties involved.
So we won't use the S words.
No, we would not at all. We say like break a leg and stuff like that, you know.
All right, well, for the hot take, let's jump in with something a little funny and interesting. As everybody knows, we're now reeling from the second Joe Biden health scandal in the last 2 weeks. And I'm not going to talk about that one. I'm sure everybody's got their own hot takes about
we haven't even established if he exists yet.
Cover-ups and things like that. That's right. The cover-up, it was Joe Biden. Like, there was no actual Joe Biden. Yeah. So that'll be a third scandal that'll come out in Derek Tapper's next book. But what is the strangest? We've done political scandals and the hot takes before, but I wanted to ask, this one's kind of strange. I mean, we're covering up a cancer diagnosis. They're covering up, dementia through years of his administration. So all this is very strange. So I asked the two of you, and we'll bring in our guest, David Dunmoyer, who is our campaign director at Better Tech. We're going to talk about all sort of tech issues today that are going through the House and the Senate. So we'll bring you in for the hot take. We'll start with you, Derek. What is the strangest scandal in American political history?
Oh, geez. I'd probably have to say if we're going like on the federal level, I'd probably say the House banking scandal.
All right.
This was in the early 90s, if I recall. As you know, the early 90s was about 50 years ago. It was in the early 90s, and long story short, basically, your congressional account you could cut checks from, and none of your checks would bounce because they were supported with the full faith and credit of the government. And so people were just like, so you go into a negative balance and then cut a check, and that check still goes. You're like, oh, I'm just going to keep going.
I thought you needed money.
and so
apparently you just want me to sign checks.
Yeah, and this might surprise you, Brian. Are you sitting down? Good, because this blew me off my feet when not all, but some congressmen are not trustworthy.
Uh-oh.
That's not true.
Yeah, I mean, huge if true. Just like Joe Biden, huge if true. But yeah, that was the thing. And some people were just like started cutting their own checks for themselves.
The strange part is that they had a system where you could just cut checks and that they would clear regardless of how much money you had in the bank.
I cannot countenance a single system where the founders would say politicians should be taken at their word.
This is like the entire plot to the first half of the movie Catch Me If You Can, right? Where he's forging checks, except they have like a subsidized way to do it as a member of Congress.
Oh, yeah.
And we're the wrong line of work.
I mean, if you're in charge of the national fisc, how can you? I mean, bouncing checks should be. You should be removed from office. I think. On those. David, what's your strangest?
Well, I was thinking beforehand. Since I was in California for COVID, there's so many things that I witnessed. Whether it was Newsom and French Laundry, and with all these political heroes of COVID that are resurging, Newsom potentially running for president. He's starting to renege on all of his. Latinx doesn't exist anymore, according to Governor Newsom. That was just a nightmare dream.
Wow, I think it's Latinx.
I'm sorry. I've been out of LBJ for 2 years now, so I've lost my indoctrination. But Cuomo, the
Andrew
wonderful
Cuomo,
Andrew Cuomo, who was just a fighter for those that were suffering from COVID. So for folks who may not remember, there was this huge scandal. The nursing homes in the state of New York, he had issued an executive order that said anyone who is of age, even if they test positive for COVID, should be ushered into a nursing home if they're eligible. And this is when there was all the information. Fauci had changed his tune 15 times at this point, and it was concluded that this is a huge immunocompromised audience. And so he pushes in folks that are positive for COVID into these nursing homes, and thousands of people die as a result. And he blames Trump, as he always does. But what's worse is About 5 months after this happened, there was a report issued on deaths in nursing homes across the country. In New York, Cuomo touted was much lower than states like Texas. Well, it's because one of his aides a month after that came out and notified Democrat lawmakers in the state, hey, we actually lied about how many people died. It was more like 2 or 3x the amount, and we didn't say that because we didn't want Trump to use us as a punching bag. And this is a guy who's now running for mayor, and we're forgetting about all these things that happened during COVID. So I'm picking that because it's salient, and I still think we haven't fully reckoned with all the craziness. And I know the talks of Biden now too.
So the strange thing there is not that politicians lied, but that he was like, "Hey, do you have COVID? Go hang out at a old folks home. Let's go get in bed with those guys."
Yeah, and then they die, and oh hey, actually, we're going to overreport COVID deaths. If you die with COVID, getting eaten alive by a shark, that's a COVID death.
Yeah.
But when it comes to actual COVID deaths in a nursing home, that didn't happen.
Well, in the interest of time, I won't tell you the whole story, but the strangest one that I saw that I remember being there in Congress at the time was there was a congressman, I think from Louisiana, named William Jefferson. And now, again, not strange that he was corrupt and taking money
from Louisiana?
Yeah, I believe it was Louisiana.
Is this where Louisiana Purchase comes from?
He will be rolling over in his grave.
That's what the New York Post probably put on the headline.
Right.
But again, not that he was corrupt, but that when they found the money, it was in his freezer. Do you remember that? It was like it was packaged in aluminum foil, put into like popsicle boxes, so that the FBI would never look in a popsicle box or something. Apparently, in frozen food. So in with the ice cream sandwiches was $90,000.
Oh my god!
As one does.
Yeah.
We found out what he would do for a Klondike bar.
The New York Post.
Damn, I don't want to give that credit, but that was so good.
The New York Post had cold hard cash.
Oh my gosh!
For his.
Wow.
All right. Well, let's get into
that.
the reason why we're all here, and that's to not talk to David about scandals, but to get into legislative issues. The shameless plug, as usual, is TexasPolicy.com/the Post. It's our weekly newsletter. You can sign up for our daily newsletter, which is the Canon, which is great as well. But the Post has all the stuff that we're working on here at TPPF, all the things going on in Texas. There's some fun stuff in there about Texas, usually every year, and then I write an exclusive column for that I'm sure you're all waiting for every week. You can subscribe to that at TexasPolicy/TexasPolicy.com/the Post. All right, David Dunmoyer is the campaign director for our Better Tech for Tomorrow campaign. There's a lot of tech issues. I mean, it feels like, I know this maybe for us at TPPF because this is a new campaign for us, but really feels like, part of the reason why we started this campaign is because there are a lot of tech-related issues, digital, regulation, AI, all kinds of things that are coming to the forefront, and has really taken off. Texas has become a real leader in this. Before we jump into some big issues, just lay of the land in terms of like why is Texas taking such a big role in the future of tech policy?
Yeah, no, great question. It's there's a lot of talk about the Texas miracle, and the more I talk about this, doing water as well, it's not by accident. It's all because of the policy, the personnel, the institutions, the workforce, all those things. And because Texas has become really the competing state with California, we now have more AI startup companies moving here. We have some of the big announcements from the last few years of HP, Oracle, SpaceX, Tesla, so on, you name it. We're becoming the epicenter of this kind of tech 2.0 or 3.0 movement because folks recognize Texas is a business-friendly state, and we have lawmakers who want to see those companies flourish. We have the energy. We're working on getting more water. And so all the resources coming together. So I think to break it down from a values perspective, because that's where, folks of friends of the pod, Peter Rex and other people who have moved here on faith, freedom, and family, Texas, we have the values of intrepidity and entrepreneurism, and there's something just inherently gritty in our DNA where we want to see companies or people move here to start those next great ventures. And so there's very much from Governor Abbott on down that tone and tenor. Hey, if you come here, it's going to be a place where the free market will actually allow you to compete and grow and become the next Google or the next Meta or whatever it might be. So there's that. But then there's also the values of we care about our people. And this isn't just the whole don't California my Texas. This is there are kids who are getting robbed of their childhood, the ability to think critically and individually. And lawmakers are empathetic to that more so than the bottom line of a company like, say, Google. Obviously, we want Google to continue to work in Texas, but if your products are intentionally pulling kids deeper into the maniacal madness of wokeism, of grooming, and so on and so forth, we strongly believe in protecting our population here. I mean, our founders saw fit to protect that, and we have lawmakers who hold that dear to this day. So California, you look at, there's a lot of great companies there, and there's plenty of bad things we could say, but that's one good thing they have. But the values now in that state are coming to a fore where executives from companies are saying that humanity is a threat to innovation. And so those kids who are being robbed of their agency, as I said, are inconvenient speed bumps that they'll pop over if they need to. And so the companies that are moving here, they recognize, all right, California is no longer a state to do business because of the regulatory environment, and we do things differently here because, yes, we'll promote you and we'll encourage you, but you have to adhere to the basic values that make our state exceptional. So really those two things brought together is what's going to position, we look, and back to Peter Rex, when he's thinking about building, he's a serial startup entrepreneur, he's got over 10 AI companies. We want to think the long-term vision of technology companies, not what's going to be big tomorrow, 10 years from now when we're looking to colonize Mars because we're going to do it from the state of Texas. What can we do to ensure that there is that long supply of continuing to build these companies to exist for generations to come? So I think if you want to go fast, go to California. They broke things, so they're coming to Texas because they want to go far.
Yeah, it seems like you outlined that pretty well. It seems like that at the time, California was, that's where Stanford was. That's where, Cal was, or Berkeley. I mean, that's where the innovation was happening, was on those campuses. And so that's why it kind of grew out from there. But as they started to get into business and have companies and things like that, they start to realize, freedom is really important to innovation.
Yeah.
And if we don't have that, then, we really can't grow. And so you're starting to see, you mentioned Peter Rex, but obviously Elon Musk is here now, and Joe Lonsdale and others who are from that world. Moving to Texas. All right. Well, that's a great way to set the landscape for what we want to talk about, which is the legislative efforts. One of the big ones that's in the news right now is maybe looking backwards a little bit, or looking the other way, which is actually banning social media for minors. This is a controversial, at least I believe it's a controversial bill. Where does that stand right now?
Yeah. So can I give a little backstory on that?
Sure.
And you were also super involved in this when we were kind of crafting out our initiative, because there is, if you just look at it on a blank piece of paper, the lines ban minors from social media, the conservative reflex is, whoa, okay, what's going on here?
The ban jumps out.
The ban jumps out. Well, what we do at TPPF when we start on issues is we research them. And so this was something that had been posited by researchers like Jonathan Haidt. If you haven't seen his work, recommend checking out Anxious Generation. Jonathan Haidt, Gene Twenge, some of the real...
Abigail Schreier,
iGeneration. A lot of good books coming out, kind of sounding the alarm, and it more so is just creating the statistical fodder, so to speak, to start addressing what are the effects of social media on minors. And so we did research on it, and former colleague Zach Whiting and I kind of started to pave that pathway. And just succinctly, our conclusion is that this is the most harmful, addictive product that kids have legal access to today, period, the end. And when we look at it from that perspective, and we can get into the data, we can get into the polling and statistics, we have a long-standing policy in the state of Texas, whether it's alcohol consumption, tobacco, firearms, tattoos, military service, where when we see there is that direct link between harms and minors and their brains not being fully developed, that there is a vested and necessary role of government to ensure we're protecting that population. So we got into it purely on grounds of the research, because I think internally we have this whole policy council process. There was a lot of head scratching. Okay, what's going on here? And I've been doing this for this specific issue for 4 years now, and I was a true believer after we finished the research. And to this day, you're right, it's controversial. We can get into who it's controversial with. I think it's one of the single most important issues when it looks to building that next generation to make sure that we're not losing them to all these outcomes we actually haven't fully see take fold yet. We know there's an increase in depression and suicidality. What's going to happen when these current 16-year-old kids are adults and they're supposed to have jobs or build families? When TikTok tells you to do something different and you're completely bought into it, we're competing with a force that really no parent can contend with in today's digital age.
Well, conveniently, we have our chief of research here, and so let's get into a little bit of the research. What did you think, and what did we find in the research that were a couple things that were really compelling to you, Derek, as you went through? Anything that surprised you in the research?
Well, to be honest with you, and as part of the policy council as well, and not to bring our deliberations out into light, but I was one of the ones who was kind of like, oh well, maybe we ban it a little, you know what I mean?
Well, other states it's 12 years old, 13 years old. Here it's all minors. So enter the age of
Or
18.
the proposal, yeah. And so entering into this process, I was like, David's a persuasive guy, but I don't know if he's going to get me into. And at the end of that paper, I was like, Rome must burn. And Rome being social media company.
You were Nero with the fiddle.
Yeah, exactly.
Can we ban it with an executive order tomorrow?
So I was shocked. I mean, obviously the correlative details we've talked about ad nauseum about depression, anxiety, and things like that. But the more you go into the research, you can actually show the pathways for that. Because saying this is correlated with that, that's saying the old saw about ice cream sales being correlated with violent crime, because both go up when it's warmer weather, right?
Yeah.
And so that tends to be one of the things that we saw in the research is that now you're actually demonstrating like causal pathways. And that is where I think I found the most compelling argument in here. And so just looking at what he and Zach were putting out, and I'm talking like he's not here, but looking at what David and Zach were putting out, it was just like, if this is your first pass at it, you go, wow, that is an absolutist, swing for the fences kind, but read the paper. It makes the compelling case that this, on net is a good thing for Texas.
Is this a recent phenomenon? I mean, I know you mentioned the books by Jonathan Haidt and Abigail Schreier and others, but those are fairly recent in terms of, making this case. Have states been pursuing this previous to what Texas is doing?
So, no, Texas, I would contend, not just because of my myopia on the state, we really set this off as a national issue. And I remember I was in prep for this podcast, I was thinking back, it was almost exactly 3.5 years ago when we had worked with Chair Jared Patterson, who had come to us and said, hey, this social media is an issue. I want to start investigating it some more. And he had published an op-ed, I believe it was co-authored by our former colleague, Zach Whiting, and it was social media is a harmful, addictive product. It's time to ban it. And it blew up. I mean, we're talking national, international headlines on it, and you would always tell us, Brian,
like blew up, like Joe Biden lied about his cancer blew up, or like how
Joe Biden.
It one article turned into 100 articles being written about it, and on Twitter and on Facebook, you had everything from the tech lobby laughing at this is ridiculous, this is asinine and absurd, to a lot of kids coming out and saying, yeah, actually, they're onto something here. And so this is about...
Yeah, not to skip ahead, but I think when we had our first meetings, I remember saying, look, this is going to be, too... I think the public perception, or at least our assumption, was that it would feel too far ahead.
Sure.
And that we'd have to dial it back. We'd go and kind of make the case during the legislative session. But you're right. As soon as we put it out there was a ton of people saying, yes, tomorrow we need to ban it. We need to get it away from our kids now.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, that was actually the goal. Internally, we were kind of planning and prepping for that op-ed dropped. We had our research. It was elevate the harms. That was my mission as campaign director. As anyone who will listen to me, I'll talk until I'm blue in the face about what's happening to our kids. And it was an uphill battle the first session. And I'll get to other states in a second here, but Chair Jared Patterson really started that whole movement. He filed, House Bill 986 last session. They all merge into one at this point. I think it was 986.
And then they sear themselves onto your brain. And so 986 will be this for the rest of your life.
That's right. And he filed that bill to ban minors from social media, 18 under, and didn't get a hearing. I got laughed out of some offices. This is backwards conspiratorial.
This isn't conservative?
Yeah, this isn't conservative. Yeah. It's what a think tanky thing to do. And so it kind of got disregarded. And then later, so in between the 88th and 89th legislature, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, there was this huge fight happening in their state where there was a couple of bills to ban minors from social media. And so it really got some traction. And this is kind of at the point when DeSantis is making more of a national name for himself too. So he ended up signing into law a 16 and under bill that had different safeguards and requirements, isn't a full-fledged prohibition, but was really that first state effort on recognizing this as a harmful product that it is. And then fast forward about, what was this, 6 months after that, so about a year ago, Australia banned social media 18 under for its entire population. So, crikey indeed. So it has gone from kind of a harebrained think tank concept to public discourse, and I'm sure we're going to get more into it, but now it's got some real legs behind it here in Texas.
Let's get into that, because that's what I think is the compelling part of this, is that once you even scratch a little bit below the surface and you start looking at the statistics, especially from the explosion of Facebook and social media, now we have statistics, 95% of kids between 13 and 17 use it, quote, constantly.
Yeah.
Like they they self-declare it as constantly using social media, which there's nothing you can, other than breathing, there's nothing you should be doing constantly that is going to necessarily be good for you, particularly social media with all the problems. And then the harms. I think a lot of people were struck by, we're not just talking about kids wasting time and not reading, they're not reading books, instead they're on social media. No, we're talking about an 80 to 100% increase in the grooming that goes on. Like on Instagram is like the #1 app for grooming kids to groom them into sexual slavery. I mean, you've got some awful horror stories from kids. So this isn't just hurting your eyes and now you need glasses at an earlier age. I mean, this is like some of the most horrific stuff that has destroyed, if not taken, young people's lives.
And I think importantly to that point, I testified. So this bill was first up in the House. This House Bill 186 this session by Chair Patterson, pretty much the same bill from last session. And it was really bizarre because Patterson had a phenomenal layout. And there was one other person there with me testifying in support and only one person there in opposition. Tech was like, this isn't going to happen. We saw what happened last session. This bill's going to flop. But when I was there testifying, I shared the stories of Leilani Walton, Jordan DeMay, and one other gal, and horror stories. One of them is the TikTok blackout challenge. And this 8-year-old girl from Central Texas, she died because the TikTok challenge algorithmically promotes choking yourself with purse strings, shoelaces, just up to suffocation. And that was really a rally cry for me when I first read that story. And I remember the chair of the committee, Trade Workforce Economic Development, came up to me afterward, and she's like, I had no idea this was happening in our backyard. And I was like, Chair, I unfortunately have almost 100 stories like this that have happened in Texas. And it kind of brings us to the previous point, which is once you have an audience that can hear this is happening, it's happening to your constituents. And by the way, the important point that I'm getting at is every single story that I've read comes from parents who thought it would never happen to them because, well, yeah, no, there's horrible stuff and there's grooming, but not my kid. Straight A student, he's captain of the basketball team. And those are always how the stories go. And oftentimes the signs are very silent because they might be more distant, they might be less passionate about hobbies. But when you're a kid, parents expect that. I mean, I was a handful when I was 14 and starting high school and, resentful and all that stuff. And so a lot of parents chalk it up as, well, this is normal.
It's emo phase, David.
It's emo phase. To show you my driver's license at some point, I had the Bieber phase, but it's
Cut
not
to
a
that
phase.
in the podcast.
Right.
We'll get that to Jefferson.
Thank you. But the point I'm getting at is parents, because it's happening. What's the saying about bankruptcy? It happens slowly.
It happens very gradually and then all at once.
All at once. Yeah. That's what happens with social media, where it's these little things.
I would think with other things that are obvious to parents, which are like, alcohol use or drug abuse or getting with the wrong crowd or skipping school and things like that. Like, there are signs that are unavoidable. What was the sign that was going to tell you that your daughter's going to go and try this, blackout challenge and end up accidentally killing herself? And it wasn't even like she was suicidal and depressed. I mean, she was just being fed this over and over,
Yep.
and she wants in on all the clicks and all the likes and whatever. There's no gradual to that. They're just they're just scrolling like anything else. Next thing you know, they're dead in a closet.
Yeah.
And that's terrifying. I mean, that's absolutely terrifying. And that's one of the things that you have exposed about this, and that and Chairman Patterson and others have exposed about this again, is we're not just talking about kids wasting their time on social media. I mean, the harms are very real. The trafficking is another big one. I think we need to talk about. What?
Yeah, so one of the stories, this one is horrifying. So in one case, there were parents, and I believe this is out of Missouri, they waited to give their daughter social media until 15. That seemed like a reasonable age. So she downloaded Instagram, and this gal, again, not raised to understand digitally how to interact on social media, starts getting friend requests on Instagram and strikes up conversation with somebody who had a lot of followers, seemed like a totally normal account, photos with friends, with somebody that was her age. So it turns out this person was grooming her. And
so it wasn't a teenage girl.
It was not a teenage girl.
Yeah.
And a month and a half into her having an Instagram account, she got abducted and sold into sex slavery. And she's gone. She's gone. Can't find her. To this day, she hasn't been found. And there are stories like that over and over again. Or, I'm sure you guys have had Ammon on here. The cartel uses this as a recruitment mechanism. And it's not just, oftentimes we think about, well, in Mexico, it's a part of their whole cartel operatives. No. The cartel is targeting American kids, offering them money to basically partake in this ring of channeling and trafficking children and sex slaves throughout the state of Texas or other states. And so the cartel is latching on to their desire for money or whatever it is. And these are 14, 15-year-old kids that are a part of a sex trafficking ring. Or in the inverse, the cartel also finds a way to use them and hold them as collateral for ransom. And so really any horror story you can imagine, we have evidence on it, we have research on it. And, you ask social media companies, well, what's going on? Why aren't you fixing it? There's this little thing called Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act, and I won't get too in the weeds on it, but I think this is important because this is kind of the whole crux of why tech policy is what it is.
That's who watches the show. It's the weed people.
Okay. That's
wait a minute. Wait a second. That's not what I meant.
You had Nikki on here 2 weeks ago, man.
Not what I meant.
But in 1996, there's kind of this reckoning happening. The internet is really taking off. And so ironically, this whole story began with Jordan Belfort's Stratton Oakmont, his company, if you've seen Wolf of Wall Street. And there was this forum online that was saying bad things. These guys are ripping us off. They're just trying to make a quick buck. And so Stratton Oakmont sues, and it starts this lawsuit. And they realize at the federal level, we don't have any certainty on how to regulate these new internet platforms. So insert Communication Decency Act. And it was basically a full-fledged reform to try and make sure we had regulatory certainty on how the internet can operate. So problem is the whole goal, 50% of it was that certainty, 50% was there's some horrible stuff out here for kids. And that's why they called it the Communication Decency Act. We want to make sure it's decent for children, and we don't want to expose them to stuff that might result in grooming or porn or whatever it might be. The courts ultimately struck down everything in the Communication Decency Act except for one section, Section 230, which says not a single company that operates online shall be held liable for what other people post. And they also have, so that's the shield, the liability shield. They have the sword to strike down any content as they see fit. And so this gets into censorship and viewpoint discrimination.
Just to clarify, this is akin to saying, like, if I use my telephone to call you and we plan a bank robbery, the federal government can't sue Verizon because I use 100%. Their service, right? Which makes sense.
Right.
In that context, it makes sense.
But would it make sense then if Verizon can also shut off that phone call if you're talking to your friend about, hey, I really enjoy this new pastor who, goes to my Protestant church.
Or if we're talking about how awesome Trump is,
exactly.
And Verizon shuts you down, that's censorship.
That'd be like Verizon having both those powers, the protection and the authority on that. So what's the problem with that? Well, Meta, back to my question, when they're asked, what are you doing? Why aren't you protecting these kids that are being sold into sex slavery? Well, we have immunity. It's not our fault. It's the cartel. We're a platform that's equal opportunity unless you're conservative, unless you voted against Trump. And so we can hide behind that. Right. And so that's where you get into this whole backwards. The intent behind the Communication Decency Act has not kept up with reality over the last 30 years at this point.
Well, I think that one of the important things that we need to talk about, because 230 is divisive issue, and I think that's because you. And look, from a free market standpoint, I don't blame them in one way, but they want to have their cake and eat it too. Is that they want to be treated, to Brian's example, very closely akin to a common carrier, but they also want to still be able to, tailor their, platform or then have a light or heavy touch censorship, depending on which organization you're talking about. And I think that we're getting bogged down here on the right, not we at this table, but I think a lot of folks are getting bogged down on the right because they have this like arch libertarian viewpoint that any regulation whatsoever is bad. But then what the thing is that they don't countenance is that the whole civil side of that debate that they currently have immunity for. And so, like I said, they want both the sword and the shield, to use your metaphor, but they don't actually want they don't want a discussion about the appropriate applications of either, as opposed to both. And that's where I think we're kind of losing the thread. Not we, again, here, but we on the right are losing the thread because we're saying, oh, they just want to, tell Facebook that, hey, you can't have, you can't censor posts about Trump or whatever. But it's like, no, Facebook wants to be able to do that. And they also want to contain the liability immunity as well. And we need to parse out that. Now, is there a ready-made off-the-shelf solution? Getting rid of 230? I don't think that's a solution because I don't think that's sufficient to address the manifold problems that we're discussing here today. But I think that this is what we need to make sure the discussion is going forward in the future.
And I agree. I know that that's an important question. The First Amendment is an important thing that we all need to respect and value. But again, this is why we developed the campaign the way we developed it, because I think it misses the larger point here is that the harms that are being done to children. I think that we're not talking about getting rid of social media for everybody, but certainly for children, at that developmental stage, what is using social media constantly do to your development, but also what does it expose you in terms of risks? And I think if you're a parent and you think Facebook is just a way for grandma to be able to see see pictures, or that the kids are just they're using Signal and not Signal, but Snapchat and other things.
Base kids,
they were added to the NatSec group chat.
They're using Snapchat just to do some meetups at the mall. I think you're the first parent who needs to get your kid off of social media because you have no clue what's going on there and the harms that you're exposing them to. Okay, all that said, I did want to play a little bit of devil's advocate here, because we do to our friends that are the arch libertarians on the right, or even just conservatives who think that this is what the conservative position should be. They call it nanny stating. That the reality is that parents just need to do a better job of being parents. And if your kid is the kind of kid who wants to go into a closet and choke himself out, that's your fault, we've heard that. I mean, I know that shocks people, but
doesn't make it any less ridiculous,
right? That's your fault as a parent for not why'd you take this away? If there are other kids who can use it responsibly, why would you take it away from them? This is just nanny statism.
Yeah. Well, okay. Let me ask just open question here. How many contracts can kids under 18 enter into? Do you want to start a credit card? You want to open a bank account? There's long-standing accepted practices in virtually all industry that kids are not eligible to enter into contracts. We're talking about it today. I mean, you want to rent a car, you wait until you're 26. But the point, and it's a valid question. It really is. So I'm not trying to dismiss it. These are multi-trillion-dollar companies that have designed and engineered contracts that do a number of things. One is they have complete ownership over your personal identity. All of your personal information, when you click accept in those terms of service, it is now theirs. Now, they'll say in the terms that it's your personal information. Yes, but it's under the custody of these technology companies. And are kids actually able to consent to these very dense legalese, dense contracts? The answer is no, not just in child psychology in that realm, but in long accepted common law practices, contractual law. I'm not a lawyer, but I've talked to enough lawyers to have heard it 100 million different ways.
We got a few in the building.
We got a few of them here. That doesn't follow with logic nor the other course of law in those places. And the second, if you look at how this bill is drafted, it grants parents the authority to have their child's social media account removed. Because what will often happen, let's say let's say I had kids and I thought my 16-year-old was old enough to have Instagram, which is not going to be the case. I'm going to be one of those Luddite parents.
When she turns 35.
Yeah. And it turns out, the kid's actually, becoming a monster because of Instagram, and you want to delete it. Well, and we'll get into app stores and all that, but these the app stores and these apps have engineered it such that if you're a parent, you want to go in and delete these apps for your kids because that's the next best thing to deleting their account. Even if you have parental control set up, once the app is downloaded, it can be re-downloaded. And so there isn't that robust safeguard for a parent to step in and say, I want Instagram gone, period, the end. When you're 18, you can do whatever you want. So that's kind of step 2, which is the bill clarifies parents, you come in and ask for the deletion of these accounts. Now, the reality is on point 3, the way the bill is drafted is that children cannot enter into these contracts. So kind of pulling on my first argument. So if there's an update to the terms of service or they change the product, that child would not be eligible to hit accept unless they show their ID and that they're over 18 years of age. So the biggest point, and just bringing it back to our research, is if you don't accept that social media is a harmful, addictive product, if you want to say that 8-year-old Alani Walton, that's her stepmom's fault that she's dead, there probably is such a worldview difference that we're not going to come to the same agreement on this. But I would just, hearken back to when Reader's Digest was touting through their doctors how safe and great and healthy cigarettes were. We're at that same moment right now, which means we're probably 5 years away from not just everyone at the federal level, from the Biden administration to the Trump administration and various research institutions across the country. Again, you don't like our research at TBPF, go to Yale, go to Stanford, go to Berkeley, any of these institutions that have research on social media. The consensus is here and the policy is catching up with it. We're at the cigarette moment, and we're about 5 years away from, I think, having that uniform axiomatic belief that it's time this product is no longer peddled to our kids.
Yeah, Derek, I struggle with the term nanny stater because I actually think it's the opposite of that. It is not conceding, you're having the government take care of you in some kind of way like a nanny. I actually see this the opposite, which is in fact empowering parents here. And in this way, yes, parents need to have that conversation with their kids the same way that they have conversations about cigarettes or alcohol or whatever. But what's a really helpful tool in as a parent, talking to my kids about alcohol use or driving a car or anything like that. What's really helpful? The law saying that they can't buy alcohol or that they can't have a license until they're 16. And while that doesn't stop kids from drinking and it doesn't stop kids from, joyriding in their parents' cars, it's at least it helps that conversation and it helps set the tone for us as a culture and as a society that we're going to value kids more and try to protect them as a society.
Well, one of the big things, and where I think, again, the kind of we say arch libertarian a bit dismissively, but we wouldn't be here unless we had some form of, at least a distillate of libertarian ideals, because that's obviously how one gets into ordered liberty, right? One of the things that I think is addressed by this, and I'd actually like to talk about a different bill because I think this illustrates it perfectly. And, obviously we've had on several other podcasts Representative Fairley, and one of her bills, and David, you'll have to give me the number.
Senate Bill 2420.
Is that a devices in school?
House Bill 1481.
I see it's seared into the brain. And that'll be 1481 for the rest of David's life.
Forget it after the session. Yeah.
No, you won't.
1481 does what?
So 1481, long story short, no devices during the school day.
Right.
That's personal devices.
Personal devices.
Yep.
And the problem is, and she's told this story in committee on the floor about her observing one of these classrooms wherein all these kids are on the devices and the teacher just gives up. It's a collective action problem because if you are going to be fighting against the entirety of your classroom and of course you're going to have some apathetic parents who are like, just let them have their phones. It doesn't matter. That is ruining the educational environment for everybody. If you've completely given up teaching because nobody's paying attention, even the kids that then want to pay attention are not able to get any educational value out of it. So I just use that to illustrate the this is a time where the government is justified in taking action, because if not, who's going to be the prime mover in that case in order to wrest control of that classroom back? There is nobody, because there can be nobody unless there is that enforcement possibility, and that is what that particular bill does. But that illustrates also the need for it for many of these other tech bills.
Can I jump in? Because that's a great point. Your point about parents have the almost like get out of jail free cards. Like, well, the state says this and it's a prohibited product. Teachers, it's the same thing. Because we had, last week, we had some teachers in here talking about they volunteered to start this initiative to have a phone-free school. And it's Richardson ISD is one of the school districts. And one of the questions during committee hearing is, well, if they're doing it voluntarily, why aren't the rest of the ISDs? And it is remarkably hard unless you have every single parent that's in PTA and on the school board has read Jonathan Haidt's book. It's not a popular thing as a parent or a school administrator to say, hey, kids, you already hate coming to school. You think we're not cool. You think we're trying to quash your social life. By the way, no more smart devices. Teachers and school administrators were asking for help from the state. And at this point on the social media prohibition, parents are asking for help from the state. And we have polling on this. Over 90% of parents feel that big tech companies aren't doing enough to provide the tools to keep kids safe online. Again, over 90% of parents, they want to have the ability to approve or deny what their kids are downloading online. And time again, we're seeing the people in Texas, and it's consonant with the research and our longstanding constitutional practice, are stepping up and saying this is a role for the state to intervene here, because it's trillion-dollar tech companies against parents, against teachers, and you can't outcompete their algorithms. You just can't.
And I think it's a completely different question if you're talking about minors versus everyone or adults. Again, once you're an adult, once you're fully developed, and you can expected to make good judgments every single day, every single minute, where we don't expect that of children, it's a completely different question. Nobody is supporting getting rid of social media for everyone or for adults. So I think it's a completely different question when you're talking about specifically minors, and that we have a different responsibility there to ensure. And I'm sure you all validate that the research also shows that although kids at first will say, no, I want to have my device or I want to be able to access it, once they go through it and they go through a few school days or a few school weeks or months without the devices in classes, they all report, it's like 70-80% of the kids will report that life is much better at school because they're actually focusing on school.
That was the most surprising thing about the hearing that I saw. I was like, I saw that all these kids were getting called up to the panel, and I'm like sitting there going, they're going to be like, don't take this away. What if there's a school shooting, or something like that? And they're like, please take away my phone.
Yeah. Right.
I was shocked.
Wow.
Yeah, yesterday was the Senate side hearing for the personal device ban, and you had a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old in strong support saying exactly. And actually, there was one girl, the 13-year-old, said, I didn't tell my friends I was coming here because they'd hate me and think that I'm taking away the fun, but they know deep down they need it. There's just this dissonance where because they're addicted, it's hard to say, hey, I need help. But for all those who showed up on that bill, the kids said, get it out of my school. And I think Senator Betancourt, he was waving his phone and said, these are toxic, addictive products, and passing this bill is the most important thing we can do this session. So
it's also remarkable because we're not talking about taking on some mom and pop shop somewhere or some lesser industry. I mean, these are the giants. I mean, whether it's the App Store bill and taking on Apple and others, or it's the digital or the social media bill and taking on Facebook, and I mean, these are giant companies that you would expect could come in with all of their money and all of their leverage and all of their lobbyists, and yet these votes are incredible. They're almost unanimous in terms of the people, the legislators who are voting to support these types of regulations. Does that surprise you guys at all? Or?
It's a testament to and I said this before today. That's a testament to the process, going about the process the right way, which these champions. Just to name a few, you mentioned earlier, Angela Paxton, Caroline Fairley, and all these champions, Jared Patterson, all these individuals go about the process the right way. Yeah. And if you're going about the process the right way and you're supported by the public sentiment, that's how you can end up with a bill with 130 votes.
Yeah. David, I also thought and you can take a whack here if you want to, but I also thought that the argument from the lobbyists was just so weak. I mean, all that money they spend and all of the access they have to research and other things, and yet their argument was, oh, the First Amendment rights of 8-year-olds, you know, and it's just, you know, compare that to our argument, which is, you know, 8-year-olds killing themselves in a closet. It was just
apparently
really,
they have that right too. So
particularly weak for them.
It's in the back of the Bill of Rights.
That even today, you know, there are pieces coming out on this, and they're still using the same weak, totally not compelling arguments about the First Amendment rights of 7-year-olds.
Yeah. No, that was, it was new for me this session. I had my first hit piece run targeting me, and I got called a naive idiot that doesn't understand the First Amendment or the bill and how it works.
So other than that, whether they were wrong.
Yeah. I was like, wow, you know, I'm going to put this on my resume. This is great. Isn't that what you're supposed to do when you have a hit piece, is putting your Twitter bio, like, as quoted by this. But no, you're exactly right. So I assembled a digital dossier just on the App Store Accountability Act bill. And basically, I just wanted to to put a nice little arrow in the quiver. How much money did big tech spend? What were their arguments? They spent close to $1 million in 3 weeks to kill this App Store Accountability Act bill. They had TV ads, social media ads. They hired, I think it was combined 13 lobbyists just to work that issue, just in the House side, including lobbyists targeting specific offices. And it was the process. It was, you know, I think there were a lot of folks that stepped up with the messaging apparatus in this too. We had a sea of coalition partners, which I want to say, to your earlier question, how have things changed in 2 to 3 years? It's not just that lawmakers recognize this is an issue. There are folks across the country that recognize Texas has a chance to lead on it, who have been helping with, again, the messaging, testimony, and all that. But, you know, you get these arguments, like one of them, the porn industry supports the App Store Accountability Act, which
that's what they said.
That's what they say. That's what opposition says.
I don't recall any porn industry representatives coming to support it.
Well, I also don't recall the porn industry being here, because the same lawmaker who passed the bill to prohibit porn for 18 and under is authoring the App Store Accountability Act, and Pornhub left the state of Texas because of that. But the point is, you know, when you're losing, start lying, and we saw a lot of that. We had lawmakers who just kept to the bill, kept to the reality of the harms facing kids, that understood the cultural moment we're in. And I think what I learned in this process is, I thought the TikTok lobbying effort at the national level on divestiture bill was the worst lobbying instance in the last 2 years. I think the App Store bill, that might take the cake, because again, we got outspent. $1 million to 1. I mean, it was
right.
Yeah, we just came in with the information, and when the lies are that bad, you can easily overturn them. But it's not to discredit all the work of the lawmakers, because that's what it was. And
I think that one of the take-home points of this is it illustrates that you can't just carpet bomb money on something and make it happen. It's just one of these things that it's, you know, the process is much more complex.
You know, the other terrible argument that I heard them make, which I mean, there's so many ways to go with this, but when you would talk about the harms, the way that, you know, because obviously it's very compelling with the stories and all of that, the books that are out there talking about the data. One of the arguments was, well, you know, Senator, just because you turn 18 doesn't mean that those harms and those threats go away. And I'm thinking, wait, so the argument is one, you're saying they should experience those harms and those threats when they're 14 and 15 years old, because that way they're ready for it when they turn 18.
They should be shooting up black tar heroin under their parents' home, because at least they can run to mom afterward. That's the argument.
The world sucks. Tough call.
Or if they were suggesting that, yes, you're right, those harms don't go away when you turn 18. So if you'd like to move the age to 25,
your terms are acceptable.
Right now I have a 3-year-old daughter. I would love for it to be 25 by the time she gets to be that age. So I just thought it was, I mean, how pathetic. I mean, that's really the only word you can use for it, is how pathetic the pushback was. Thankfully, honestly, because, you know, I think that, you know, a couple years ago they may have walked in here and said, we can throw some money around, we can water down. That's another thing too, is like watering down the bill. I mean, and that was the whole process too, is making sure that it kept the teeth that it needed. That way, if something were to pass that were watered down, that's almost worse, right? Because then you've passed it and you think,
pat yourself in the back and move on.
But nothing actually changes, and so that was really critical. What were the final votes in the House and the Senate, where are we on the social media ban right now?
So the social media ban, we'll start there. House Bill 186 that passed out of the House committee unanimously. It passed the House floor. I think it was 110 in support, 20 or so in opposition. And then it passed over to Senate State Affairs. It was heard last week, should be voted out this week. It sounds like the votes are there. So just waiting on a vote for that. But if the House is any indication, so actually if we're reversing, On the App Store bill, that passed out of the Senate. I think it was unanimously -1. We can guess who that might be. And then the House, that was the harder hurdle. So the Senate tends to be very quick in dealing with these kid safety issues. So obviously we still got a bit of runway here, but based on what happened House side, it's looking pretty good.
Yeah. I want to back up just a little bit because we have just a few more minutes left. And we'll probably have to scrap with our 10-minute drill here at the
Not
end.
our
just
fun
'cause
stuff.
Yeah, well, maybe we get to some of it. But, just backing up here, I mean, between, we haven't even talked about, there's more effort and to get the inappropriate materials out of our school libraries and to stop the indoctrination that's going on there. There's an attempt to, fix some laws that we passed last session to do that, to give them more teeth. Between that stuff, the stuff we're doing with social media and the App Store, but then also, school choice. We passed school choice this year, so now we've met our contractual obligation to talk about it. David, you don't have kids yet, but I mean, as and you have young children, Derek, and I have a 3-year-old. I mean, this is the year of the parent. I mean, this is the legislative session of the parent. I mean, you think about so many things have been framed in terms of giving parents more control over what their kids are seeing and experiencing, and giving them the rights to have a chance to say, I don't want you seeing this at all. You don't have my permission. You do. I want to. First of all, they're doing things without their knowledge, and then they're doing things without their consent. We're changing all of that in Texas. I mean, do you see, maybe, Derek, do you see this as, again, another movement that's like really getting going here in Texas?
Yes and no. I would say the movement is kind of coalesced around that particular framing, but I think that the actual activity is something that, is, the framing aside, it's what people want, right? Like, school choice didn't just happen because, some of the math in the House changed, or certain no, people saw post-COVID, and this is something that even I think folks on the anti-school choice crowd is never going to be able to reconcile mentally. It's once people saw what was going on in the classrooms, they were done. It was because that showed the institutional capture from a particular social aspect that normies weren't cool with. And I think that, framing it, and that led itself to that natural framing. But that being said, I'm thinking that this is really going to be something that does coalesce into let's say a parent-centric movement. When I say I don't think we're there yet, it's because there's no cohesion to it yet.
Sure.
They're over here in education, they're over here in tech policy, and they're over, and those circles do overlap. Don't get me wrong, but it's less of this. It's many 6-foot waves and not quite the tsunami.
You've got the groups that are parents for education.
Yes.
Then you've got the groups that are like parents for keeping porn away from my kids. And yes, they overlap, but they really are almost separate groups.
They'll straddle a lane, but they won't go across 4. You know what I'm saying?
Do you? Is the vision here, David? I mean, you don't have kids yet, but God willing, someday. I mean, by the time you have kids and they're in their teens, I mean, will it be normalized that in the same way that we all understand, you don't drink till you're 21, you can't buy cigarettes until you're 18, you can't get into contracts until you're adult. There's those things that don't even pass us off as controversial. Do you think in 10 years or something, it's going to be like, yeah, of course you can't have certain social media, types of access to types of apps and things like that until you reach 16 or 18 or whatever, and we sort of normalize that. Is that part of the vision?
Yeah. So there's this phenomenon, right, where if you're sick and then you have a dog, you're more inclined to give the medicine to your dog than to yourself, because we can see, hey, I need to care for others, and I might be experiencing pain and harm or whatever, but there's this sense that I need to focus my energy here. And I bring that up because one of the more recent stats from Pew is that kids, I think it was 13 to 17. 50% recognize, 49%, I'll be precise, recognize that social media harms themselves or their peers. And so the generation, I'm right on the cusp of millennial, but let's say Gen Z to late millennial, they're the ones that recognize and have grappled with the harms firsthand. And so they're more inclined to give the medicine to their kids, which is no social media, because I know what it did to me, and it may have been too little, too late. I got addicted by the time I was 14. That reckoning is happening. And I think to the next point, I agree with what you're saying. We're kind of in this Venn diagram land of where is that overlap. For the conservative movement, Elon talks about how, well, he talks about many things, but when he talks about Rome, I just love his point. He's like, Rome didn't cease to exist because they didn't have the best aqueducts or the best infrastructure or the best army. They ceased to exist because they didn't have enough Romans. The conservative movement needs to work toward how are we going to ensure that we're pro-family creation, pro-parental empowerment. And I think bills like this, they give me confidence as a hopeful future father that I have the tools that I need to be successful. Or you look, the era post-heartbeat bill in Texas, we're doing more now to ensure not just that we're preventing the atrocity of harming unborn babies, but supporting those mothers who may be single. What are different ways that we can make sure they're connected with community care and other aspects there? The more we can do to own that issue as conservatives, that's the Venn diagram center where, I mean, good luck telling the left saying at that point, well, you don't care about the mother, only that, fetus that doesn't really have any rights or life, if you're actually a part of a party that's supporting all and encouraging that entire circle of Venn diagrams. So that's the goal.
And it feels like with social media, the apps and all of that, we're trying to roll back mistakes that we should, we should have corrected 10 years ago or shouldn't have gotten into or should have gotten ahead of. So that brings me to an issue that we could do a whole other podcast about, which is artificial intelligence and AI. Derek, we're working on, bills and sort of a regulatory framework for that in the sense that we saw what happened with social media and we just sort of let the tech bros go, use Wild West, and we saw what happened to our kids. There's a lot of the impetus for getting ahead of that and saying, look, AI is going to be 100 times, 1,000 times more powerful than just the social media algorithms. What do we need to do now to prevent the next generation of kids from being affected the way social media did?
Well, first and foremost, let us not move past that. David just admitted to taking dog medicine. Like that, I mean,
it's horse dewormer, okay?
We're going to have that clipped and put up online by mine.
That's a special kind of COVID that you're trying to adjust to over there.
But no, so on the AI front, and David's much more articulate on this than me, is one of the things, and this is one of the toughest balances we want to strike, is we do want to lead in AI. And nobody, I don't think there's anybody.
Innovation.
There's nobody would say otherwise, and specifically in military applications as well, because that tends to be in a more existential thing. And it's not necessarily a series of binary choices where you're going between, we're getting rid of Google predicting the rest of your search sentence versus Skynet, right? And so what we're trying to do is actually have like a use-based I would say regimen for going forward, and to the type of the amount of thumb on the regulation that we're selecting. Because it is true that, the harms that David illustrated, that essentially, if you look at the algorithms on these social media apps, that is AI. I wouldn't say that primitive, but a less robust form of it that goes, oh, you like this stuff? Have some more of this stuff. But the thing is, even if the casual observer, if you have something that's like shocking or like, galls the conscience, you're going to dwell on that and you're going to react because you've just been shocked by it. And they're like, oh, David likes these car crash videos. And obviously I'm making this up. Sure. But it's something that like you dwelled on or that you had the feedback response they're looking for on because of negative issues or because of negative reasons as opposed to positive reasons. And so having that is a good framework of understanding what it is we're looking to do in the AI space.
David, unfortunately, we have a few minutes left. You could talk a whole, like I said, a whole another podcast about AI. But
I have to wear my T-shirt for that one.
I forgot to cross promote, but I'll do it at the end of the show.
It's all good.
David's got a podcast. We'll talk about it at the end. But AI, in terms of the approach that Texas is taking towards, for lack of a better term, the regulatory framework. Is that scaring the Joe Lonsdales and the Elon Musks of the world, or what's the responsible approach that we're taking there?
Yeah, so the short answer is no. The longer answer is it was a 1.5 year long process where we thought through many of those concerns you articulated, which is, okay, what happened with social media can't happen again with AI because it's going to be 10 million times more potent. And so we got to a position where we're at now, House Bill 149. It just passed out of the House near unanimously, just passed out of Senate B and C, headed to the governor in the next week or so here. And it's an outcome-based model. So it's not like California, it's not like Colorado. We're not saying, hey, you have to follow all these steps before you bring your system online, pre-deployment requirements. No, it says AI systems should not be developed with the sole intent to create child sex abuse material, social scoring system, government surveillance, unwarranted biometric collection, very just red meat conservative items. And the key kicker is with the sole intent. We understand ChatGPT does some stupid woke things, and there's a lot of complexity as to how these systems work. And so the idea is very wide, clear rules of the road. Don't focus your time and energy on this, because to Derek's point, there's way more important things for hegemony in the AI space than creating a nudification app. It's morally reprehensible, but it's also a head scratcher if your concern is regulation detracts from the race against China. So let's focus our AI efforts on where it really matters. And then second, we took a very different approach. We want to ensure we're promoting innovation. So we have a very think tanky concept called a sandbox, where new companies that are moving to Texas or started up operations in Texas for 36 months, you're in this incubation environment where you get preferential regulatory treatment. You get to work with different state authorities, and you get to help the state of Texas determine, as you're developing your technologies, what are we missing regulatorily? Do we need to cut red tape? What are some of the cool emerging themes happening in technology so lawmakers can actually be on par with what those advancements are? And then finally, in creating an AI council, we use that to enforce the learning lessons from these sandbox participants. They find out, hey, there's this really onerous Secretary of State requirement reporting thing they have to do, and it sets us back 2.5 months. Boom, there's a suggestion legislatively for next session. So it's really twofold. It's rules of the road to prevent litigious hellscape, and we have certainty of what you can and can't do, and it's very light touch. And then two, we're going to learn as we go to make sure we're continuing to outcompete with China. And the last thing I'd say to plug, I know there's a lot still happening on energy, and we're hoping, I know House State Affairs is considering some important energy bills. That's where Texas is going to have to continue to step up in the AI race, because if we don't have the energy for data centers, we don't have the infrastructure for these companies to call Texas home. So those are kind of the big things that we've talked about. And shout out to Chair Giovanni Capriglione, Senator Tan Parker, Senator Schwartner. They've been leaders in the space, and because of it, we're going to have the model for the country.
Well, that wasn't 2 minutes, but it was very coherent and very succinct, and I think you nailed it all. No, that's fantastic. I mean, I'm sure that's a lot to cover, and maybe we'll have you back whenever the AI bills get through. But thank you for being here, and thank you for illuminating all of this very important issues. And I thought it was a good discussion about the philosophical underpinnings of what we're trying to do here in Texas, because it is new, and a lot of conservatives might be unsettled by what they're seeing in the news. And so I think it's a really important discussion to have. So thanks for coming in and being back on the pod.
Thanks for having me back.
With us. And thanks, Derek, as always, for your cunning insight. So we appreciate that. And thank you for being here and listening and watching. As we always like to say at the very end of our show, in the immortal words of Sam Houston, do good and risk the consequences. We'll see you next time.